Okay, welcome everyone to the Boise UU Fellowship, who generously provides us some space. And the Jung group has been meeting here for many years, getting into the decades now, I think. And Mary was one of the founders of the Idaho Friends of Jung. And she's going to share her story of exploration of psychology through a Jungian lens from when she attended a psychology class in 1959 at the tender age of 21. And it so struck her that she has maintained an interest in the collective unconscious and Carl Jung's work throughout the following decades, and is going to provide somewhat of a retrospective of her life and engagement with Jung. And this is Mary Clagett Smith.
Thanks, Chris.
You're welcome.
Well, it was a long, long time ago, and what I'm going to do is all typed out in case I need to. I'm not always comfortable when I'm in front of people, and if I need to read, I will. But I'd much rather talk to you. And my husband, Wally, right there on the sofa, said I really should just talk. And I know this material so well. I mean, I'm not the depths of Jung, but certainly my path I do know. So I'll start with how I was the firstborn of 6 children in Minnesota, and I was we were all born of parents whose own parents advised each of them to be stern and strict throughout the children's childhood. That was some kind of movement in that era. I got spanked often, but I'm not sure if I ever felt guilty. I loved it when my mother would read stories to me, Wind in the Willows and Winnie the Pooh, especially. But I just don't remember any cuddling, and they weren't supposed to do that. So I didn't get that. And once when I was about 10 and at home in bed sick with a cold, she gave me a huge book to read of her choice that was a book of myths and fairy tales, and it had university in the title. I remember thinking that was impressive. And I was sick in bed, and she brought it to me to read. That was her choice. Well, I don't know how many of you remember the Nancy Drew mysteries a long time ago. Well, I have just discovered them, and I put my mystery inside of the big book and read from my bed and got caught and got spanked. And I was 10 or 11 years old. Well, that was the last spanking, and I think those spankings made me feel like a bad person, because that's what she called me. You're a bad, bad girl. And I wondered, was I really? I dutifully continued with piano lessons that she wanted for me. My mother was a musician, played the cello herself, and she wanted me, the oldest, to play the piano too. So, of course, I clicked my heels and did what I was told. And I ended up, I got pretty good at the piano and did a lot of accompanying in the community, our little community in Minnesota. And I did choose to go to college to get a music degree. And I ended up with a piano performance degree, but I did not like to perform. You know, I was all 4 years in college, and I didn't really realize what I was getting into. I loved playing, and I played well. But when one time my teacher told me that there was a little community nearby Ann Arbor. I was at the University of Michigan, and they were looking for somebody to play Rhapsody in Blue, and asked me if I wanted to do it, and I was horrified at the idea of playing in public, so I said no, not me. finally, after college, my roommate, who had studied German as a major, and I, who both liked to ski, moved to Austria it was about 1957 then. And while I was there, I might read a little bit of this. I eventually met an Austrian young man to fall in love with. When my parents came to Vienna for my father's work, I chose to introduce them to Carl. But this was my mistake. The next morning, my father, I've never been able to call him my dad, my father ordered me to come to the hotel. I got a lashing of his impressions. Carl's English was mediocre. After high school, he attended a trade school program because he did not qualify for university education. Therefore, he could not provide for me adequately, thought my father. My mother, that whole time, sat in that hotel room and said not a peep, not one word of defense. But I told him, I'd met his lovely parents. His sister sewed me an Austrian dirndl dress. Carl himself was the manager of a leather goods factory. My father's anger mounted and I sobbed. Did he not like Carl? Maybe because he was a foreigner. This was the mid-30s, and my father hadn't traveled in the world. He grew up in a small part of Colorado. I thought maybe he didn't like foreigners. My father then ordered me to leave Austria immediately. And I felt stabbed, but I obeyed. My heart was broken, and my confidence in directing my own life was shattered. So that was kind of the beginning, I think. I went back to Minnesota, and I got in on the third trimester at the university, where I took a psychology course, and it was a lot about Carl Jung. And so I got very interested, and I would talk to her at all the breaks, and afterwards, at the end of class, and finally she said, you really should follow up on this interest. It's clear that you're curious about Carl Jung. So ever since that class, when I was 21, I've been interested. I left Minnesota and never even discussed with my parents what I was going to do with music. They never questioned me. I don't know if they were afraid to or what, but they got out of my way, and I left for San Francisco, where I ended up, I did a lot of part-time jobs, and this was part-time too, but it was assisting in a preschool classroom at the Unified School District of San Francisco. They'd converted some two-story buildings into childcare, full-time childcare, and of course we were in the lower level with no stairway, and I loved the work, and I worked with two wonderful women full-time, and I was just half-time from 2 to 6, and I got so interested, they pointed out a human development course at San Francisco State, which I took and just loved. And one time I was on one of the open cable cars, and my notes were on my lap in a book or something, but the wind caught them and blew them off, and I hopped off immediately to keep them. I needed them badly. So I remember that was just a strong urge to rescue all those notes from that class that I loved. One of those women was from New York. One of the teachers in that classroom with children said, clearly you're interested in young children, and there's an institution on the East Coast that you should be interested in. And she was from New York City herself, and this institution was Bank Street College of Education, which was was started in 1919 when first war, our first World War One, and a lot of mothers were going to work because their husbands were gone, and there were some educators at the time that were concerned that the children that were put in huge child care centers needed good things to happen for those children. So there were some psychologists in the group at Bank Street that were attracted to Bank Street, and they formed committees and studied what young children need, what they should have in their environment. So I went home. I left San Francisco after a year, went home to live at home and save my money, and I worked at a nursery school there, a really fine one. And then I earned enough money to take the train to New York City, the great big city, which was very exciting for somebody that grew up in a little town in Minnesota. And I went to Bank Street. I got accepted and didn't get my degree right away. That took 10 years after I had 3 children. That was a mistake to wait so long. Let's see that was the next highlight. I found myself learning how children grow and learn and what my own childhood had missed. Self-worth gets built from one's own abilities and support, developing confidence and finding security. In 1962, I met Wally in Manhattan, and we got married and produced a family of 3 children. Eventually, we moved to Boise for Wally's work, since he's here. I can call him by name. We moved to Boise for his work and the great outdoors. I'd grown up with grandparents in Colorado, and I loved the mountains, and he grew up in New York State and didn't know much about mountains, but he was willing to go west and have an adventure. And we've loved being here ever since. I taught kindergarten. No, I did that. When they were old enough, well, first of all, I had a lot of friends who were putting their children in childcare that were what do we call it now? They have to be
License.
Licensed, thank you, Annie.
Yes.
And I was just appalled at where friends of mine were putting their children, and so I thought something has to change. And I finally decided in 1979 that Boise needed a good program for children, and the community needed to have something for their children to experience. And so I put the Bank Street program, which called itself Developmental Interaction, and it had several remarkable PhD women in psychology who were taking hold and doing a lot of groundwork and a lot of watching, a lot of writing of what they were seeing children doing, and they through from 1919 to about the 30s. They slowly grew out of Greenwich Village, that's where I went to Bank Street in Greenwich Village. And right now it's outgrown that little place that was about a 3-story building. And now they're near Columbia.
Yeah, Upper West Side.
Upper
West Side.
Yeah, on the west, the village on the west side and Columbia on the west side, yeah. And so I started the children's school, and tonight, big surprise, one of my first students when I was teaching 4-year-olds is Gretchen, sitting right here, who has become
Wow.
a PhD psychologist herself.
Wow.
Excuse me?
Child clinical psychologist.
Child clinical psychology. And her mom, Anne, is sitting next to her. Anne and I have been very close friends for a long, long time. Anne you were very involved in a little later in Jungian activities in Boise, weren't you? But not that
When
early.
we kind of
All together.
yeah.
As you had your own 3 children and got more and more interested because you have a degree in social work.
Right.
And
It was just really interesting and how you just can't imagine how different this was for people. It's this concept of the school that Mary was bringing to Boise. And we would have little gatherings of mothers and trying to tell them it would be okay. And, and eventually we had 6 or 8 or kids in your very first.
well, it grew from 12 to 14 when the word got out.
It was more than that.
And there were 2 teachers, definitely 2 teachers, yeah.
And did the kids go all day then? Is that what you're saying?
No, they just went half days.
Half day, but every day.
Yeah, and this was a 4-year-old group every morning.
But wasn't there one day they went till 1 o'clock or something?
I
Because
don't
that was a
remember.
concept.
Oh, the moms wanted to them to stay a little longer.
They were finally getting into
They took one out.
it. I mean, it really took a lot of courage for Mary to bring this idea. It was quite revolutionary here. What you were doing.
Mm-hmm.
It was not the norm.
But it was so important to me.
Oh.
And I didn't really realize at the time how hungry I was to learn what children really do need. And it goes way back to my own life with my family. And so, well, I'll move along. Thanks, Anne.
Thank you.
Let's see I'm in Boise, so that was, it was a great start. 14 children, enthusiastic parents. We met with parents, not as often as parents have access now, but I moved up with those children to 5-year-olds. Did we call it kindergarten, Gretchen? Do you remember?
Well, my kindergarten year, we moved back east for Mount graduate school.
Oh, that's right. So you had
Just
to
there
leave.
the first year.
Yeah. But then we added I was with 5s, then we had, and 2 teachers, and then I hired 2 more teachers to teach 4-year-olds, and there was room in this little itty-bitty church on Pierce Park that we rented from the Universalist Church. At that time, Universalist Church, not Unitarian, not UU yet. And then we added a 3-year-old class, I think. There was room for one more group of 3-year-olds that only came 2 or 3 times a week. Mothers just wouldn't part with them, and I was not, that seemed pretty young to be gone so long. Then we had to look downtown and get a better building, and we wanted something with a big empty lot next door that we could develop into a really wonderful playground where children got to play in the sand and play with water and build little rivers downhill and learn about building little dams and just discovery. The whole thing is discovery, children outdoors and exploring trees and bushes and dirt and sand and along the way, then I was still struggling with my own capability or my own just not feeling good about myself, even though I was proud of the school and I was thrilled that it was working. I didn't pay myself anything for a while because I couldn't afford to, but that was all right. I had a husband who was providing for the family, and so I didn't worry about that. But then I did hear about this place on the West Coast called Esalen. And I found out a lot about it and signed up and went there for a week and had an incredible experience there. Something I'm going to read here. Its purpose was to promote personal and social transformation, healing by exploring and realizing human potential with empathy, kindness, and expanded consciousness, to raise self-awareness and human potential via philosophical and psychological means. I was still suffering from having had no parental support when young. My father was preoccupied with his medical surgical field, and my mother was still cool and judgmental. I was filled with self-doubt. Am I interesting? Does anyone really like me? Am I capable or valuable? So I attended for a whole week and sobbed through most of the circle of 15 or 16 wonderful people from all over the country. And I made good friends, came home happy but not yet healed. Then in Boise, I was involved with a group of psychologists that were gathering together, social workers and psychologists, to carry out a California program. Was that TA? Is that what it was called?
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember TA?
Transcendental.
Transcendental. And they were bringing somebody from California, Denton Roberts, to Boise, and they wanted a few couples in the group that weren't professional psychologists or social workers. And so Wally and I got involved with 3 or 4 other couples that were supposedly ordinary people. I don't know what we added to the group, but it was a wonderful group. Do you remember?
I thought we were guinea pigs.
Oh, well, maybe sort of. After that, that program had a lot to do with my mother, and I took a lot of notes. And finally, I thought, I was about 58 at the time, and my mother was alone in Minnesota. My father had died. I decided I was going to fly to Minnesota and settle the issue once and for all. Does she love me? And I practiced on the plane all the way to say not the question, but I wanted to say, I never thought you loved me. So I did that. And she just looked right at me. She was glad I was coming. She was living in a retirement home, and she looked straight at me, didn't blink an eye, and answered. She said, "My parents said it would spoil you." Well, I can hardly talk about it still because it was so dramatic an answer. And I remember that I was so shocked that in my brain, everything in the room got loud. We were in a dining room at her place, and it had a lot of other people eating around her. There were big colorful balloons in the air that were exploding out loud, and I was shocked and sort of frozen in place, but I had this spectacular sensation of balloons and noise. The room was suddenly very loud with voices. And so that we spent the next 2 days just telling each other we loved each other. It was still not possible for her to really do much but hug me. But I know that she really did, but she didn't know any better. And she wasn't allowing herself to express anything to me the way it's done today. I mean, now we're pretty open parents, I think, with young children. And I decided when we had our 3 children, I was very aware that I felt unloved all that time. And I decided that what I would do is enjoy my children. I didn't call it love, but I decided I'm going to enjoy these kids, and I did. We have always loved our kids, and they feel it and they talk back about it. So that was a good thing. But back to Jung. Then now we're in about 2003, and I got in the mail a brochure of 5 or 6 or 8 pages called Midlife and Beyond, and it was going to be a week-long conference in Ireland run by the, you might have to help me, Lou, the New York City, they call it the New York City.
New York Jungian Society.
Yeah. They were running it. And Wally and I signed up. He decided he was kind of curious. And I made him, I told him he had to really behave and, and not ask wrong questions or silly questions. But it was an extraordinary experience. And there were people from all over the United States that were there. I can't remember how many. Very well organized by that group in New York. And they're still at it today, doing conferences all over the world. We went again 3 years ago back to Ireland because of the content, the speakers that were going to be there then. So if any of you are interested in this group, I'd be happy to give you information on how to get in touch with them because they're still traveling. It's R.A. Maidenbaugh and his wife is Diana? I can't remember. Anyway, the two of them
Might be good.
do this, and they do summer programs too that we can watch. I Zoom them every summer because they gather together a bunch of
Well, Mary, remember
psychologists.
when that man came here? You brought him, I believe.
James Hall.
Well,
Finding
yeah,
Meaning in
I
the
didn't.
second half of life or
Yeah.
something.
That's where I met him
Yeah,
in
that's-
Ireland.
Yeah.
Yep. And
Keynotes.
and he that's how I got to know who he was. And when we formed in about 2003 the Idaho Friends of Jung, then we asked him to come, and he did come, and he gave and we had over almost 300 people in the audience. I don't know if any of you were there, but it was a big audience, and he did an extraordinary job speaking. But I brought his book along tonight because this is his last book. And he's retired. He's 83 or 4 now, living in Washington. I don't think he's an analyst anymore. He's been highly appreciated throughout a lot of other Jungian groups, like Michael Conforti, the Italian, Assisi Institute. He got a wonderful award there. So, and some others, but he's been an extraordinary person. Written over 30 books. I'm sure some of you have read them. But he wrote them as he matured himself. And so this last book, instead of calling it The Meaning of Life, it's A Life of Meaning, and it's his own life. It's beautifully written. Have you read it?
Not that one, others.
Yeah, this is the newest one, and it's the most frank and open about his own life. It's fascinating, and very beautifully written. And it was a radio show in Denver, not a show. It was a radio event when he was interviewed, and so it's conversational. He was given permission then to move it into book form. And so, but you feel the lightness of a conversation going on between the woman that interviewed him and his answers. It's just a wonderful, very easy to read. And I'm going to read a little bit out of it at the end. So let's see what happened after Ireland. Midlife and Beyond. And back in Boise, I continued reading Memories, Dreams, and Reflections. It is so battered that it's full of tape to hold it all together. And it was a paperback book, and it's all brown and getting pretty battered looking. Back in Boise then, I joined the Barnes & Noble Book Club that Scott Heider started. Scott had moved here in about 2003, and a lot of us went out there once a month, I think. I don't think it was weekly. Does anybody remember? That went very well, and it was a way for him to get his name out and be out in the forefront, and finally he saw who was most interested, so we formed IFJ, Idaho Friends of Jung. We knew about Oregon Friends of Jung, so why not be an Idaho group? And so some of you got involved during that time. Bill Renwick was very involved, and he brought Richard Tarnas from San Francisco to Boise. And many of you have been to some of those. He came 3 or 4 times, I think, and he was pretty extraordinary. And eventually I worked with Scott personally myself to sort out my own lingering troubles. Then there are 2 more extraordinary events that I want to tell you about. But I also though wanted to take a break and just let you ask questions if there's anything you want to ask me before I wrap up, and then there might be questions then. But I'm willing to be questioned if there's anything you want more information about.
I'm always curious about where people's parents have come from. I'm always curious about that because when I worked at the VA with combat veterans, it was probably the 3rd question I asked, like, well, where are your people from? Because there were certain, we would have guys like from German families in North Dakota, which were very different from Southern Baptists in Arkansas. And I'm just wondering what your ethnic background was of your parents.
Yeah, they were on my father's side of the family. They were English, and they came over to this country way back in the 1700s. And my mother's family, the same. They came from the continent, Germany, Austria, but way back. So they were pretty grounded in this country.
And do you think that had an influence on how they parented and how they were parented themselves?
It could be coming from Europe way back, maybe. They each lived in a very small town, and they were very modest people. They didn't. Well, I think my mother's family went to church. But they did. In fact, they were way back in the 1700s. Her family was named Ballou, and there is an early form an American founder of the Universalism in this country, in New England, named Ballou. Hosea Ballou. And so there was church way back then. But my mother didn't really feel it. Her parents, that it was mostly in New England in those days. But she just in reading, and it was an interesting name, Ballou. It was easy to find out what had gone on in New England. Well, if there aren't any more questions, I'll just go along and... Oh, Chris has a question. No,
I
you've
put
just
it
got
away.
that. Okay. um,
Well, I do have a question. I don't think I'm.
Yeah.
For the recording.
Okay. Yeah, no, just my question is, and perhaps you'll get to this as you continue speaking, but what was it particularly about Jung that attracted you, as opposed to any of the other psychologists that you probably became familiar with over time? But I remember when I read Memories, Dreams, and Reflections in college, I used to call him Jung, right?
Yeah.
I have no, it was what my college roommate that said, no, it's Jung. And it was Memories, Dreams, and Reflections that really grabbed me and said, oh my God, this guy's really giving me a whole new window to life. But rather than talk about me, what is it about Jung that particularly appealed to you?
That's an interesting question because it occurred to me when I was putting this all together, and I thought I need to go back to the book and see exactly, because I remember being moved that he wanted to be, or his father wanted him to be a doctor, and he was more interested in psychology and that hospital full of what would we call it today? People that mentally are not
Crazy
functioning
people?
well. But
Crazy people?
wait, we have an
Developmentally delayed.
yeah. Well, maybe did that, but and they were put out in the countryside and
Well, in those days they called it mental hospitals.
a mental hospital, yeah, and that intrigued him, and but he knew there was pressure on him to become a doctor. I don't know if that's what you remember, but I remember thinking he's his own person. He's going to figure things out himself, and then that hooked me for the rest of all of his explorations, things that he got interested in, and the traveling he did, and looking into I have trouble finding words these days. I'm that old. What is this? What was that ancient custom of trying to burn metal?
Alchemy.
Alchemy. Thank you. I love that he got interested in alchemy
He did astrology charts.
and
too,
astrology. Yes, he did. So I admired hugely what he was in charge of himself. And I guess I wanted some of that for me. Shall I go on, or is there another question? Oh, well then, this was an incredible experience. So several of us had gone over to Oregon Friends of Jung, and they had 8 a year, I think, 7 or 8 monthly talks in a big church, and wonderful speakers, and several of us went over several different times for different talks. And finally, I read that 2 women who worked with Marion Woodman, who became a Jungian analyst herself, and in Zurich, she was very interested in applying Jungian thought to women's problems, especially young girls, adolescent girls who were eating too much, or not eating enough and starving themselves, either one or the other. And so she had 2 of her women who worked with her had developed a movement program, and they were going to be in Oregon, and I thought, oh boy, Marion Woodman, I want to go to this, and I signed up to go see how they were using movement to help young girls. Well, then it turned out that Wally had an activity at work that it was almost a social event, but not quite. And he really wanted me to be there. I can't remember any more details than that. And it was at the same time, same weekend. So I gave up going over to Portland to be involved in some Marion Woodman activity. Well, then the next fall, I found out that Marion Woodman was going to be at Pacifica Graduate Institute in California in person for a whole week. And so I thought, that's my opportunity. This was meant to be. I'm not sorry for myself anymore that I didn't go to those women. And so I made a plane reservation for leaving on Sunday to get there Monday. Friday night, I got appendicitis.
Oh my God.
And I was devastated. And my surgeon did the surgery Saturday, and I told him what I had been planning to do and how disappointed I was, and I had no choice. And I'm glad to have the surgery over. And he said, because I had already canceled, I called the directors, and they said, well, you can't come because there are going to be some very active physical activities every day, using the whole floor, movement. And I told him this, and he showed me the three tiny Band-Aids on those little incisions. He said, you're going to be fine, and I'm going to write a letter for you, a medical letter. You go. So I did go, and it was an extraordinary experience. There were about 37 people there, few men, but mostly women. And Marion was extraordinary and told the story, and I'll tell you, because it's such an unusual happening, she fell and was using a wheelchair, and her husband came and gave a talk one day in her place because she wasn't supposed to be out and about. So he told the story that when she came back from Zurich, and at one point in her training, just to have a break, everybody had a break, I guess, she was with him, and he wanted her to give up all of that and stay with him, be home, and be a good wife, probably. And he asked her, and they had a dog that lived there and was listening to all this. And he said, so are you willing to consider giving this all up and just moving back to home? And she just looked at him and said, no. And the dog got up and ran to the other end of the room, smacked into the wall, and died.
Wow.
The dog had heard that
Wow.
and understood it.
Hmm.
So,
Wow.
so that was how important it was to her at that point.
Mm.
So at the end of the very last thing that they were building up to for the whole week was an activity where we would each choose a partner and spread out on mats all over the floor of the room. And we'd each take turns, because one of us was going to lie down and our partner was going to put her hand on our belly, and the room would be quiet. And so there were 36 or 7 of us spread out all over the room, but two in each group, so we were, 17, 18 pairs. And I just lay there and wondered what I was supposed to do or what was going to happen, and pretty soon one of her assistants came over and put a beautiful blanket over me. And I thought, I'm not really cold. What's this about? And she said, relax. And all of a sudden, and I had this friend's hand on my belly, all of a sudden I started bawling.
Mm.
It's hard to talk about it without bawling right now, but everything came out.
Mm.
And I bawled, I couldn't stop. And finally it was over. Everybody else had left the room. Marion Woodman herself had come up, had gone across the room in her wheelchair at that point and stood at my head, and I put my hands up around her ankles as if I wanted to say thank you. I know what this is about. And everybody left the room and they turned the lights on, and she was still there. She said, "Come over and look at yourself in the mirror." And my face was lively, and soft. She said, "Look how soft your face is." Well, those tears were giving up the mother hate. I gave it all up in that outpouring that her program was leading up to. And it was just extraordinary, what I'd gone through and how different I felt now. And so that was huge for me. And came back to Boise and just resumed my life. But then, so it was 72 years of the hurt and misunderstanding with my mother that got released in that moment. And then Marianne wrote me a postcard when she got back, just asking me how I was, and I certainly saved that postcard. In fact, I journaled the whole time that I was there at that workshop. Yeah, that was a pivotal moment in my life. Well, then there was one more that happened pretty recently, and then I'll be done. But Wally and I were celebrating our 60th wedding anniversary 2 years ago, and our son in Los Angeles brought his family up to celebrate with us, and we had built a cabin about 3 hours away from Stanley and Redfish Lake, and we were going to redfish. Our daughter-in-law badly wanted to hike on a hike across at the very end of the lake, and you had to be there at 8 o'clock to get on the speedboat. So we were all in one car. I think we were in one car. We must have fit everybody in. 2 kids were there too. Anyway, we went to Redfish Lodge at Redfish Lake, and they were headed down out on the water to get into the boat, and I was kind of bringing up the rear, and suddenly thought, I don't really want to go. I'll just hold them up. I can't hike that fast, and I don't really want to go. I'll just hold them up. I think I'll stay here. So at the last moment, I waved them off. I said, I'm not going. You go have your fun. I'm staying here. And then when that was done, I thought, what have I done? What's going on? And I went into the lodge and had a little breakfast. And then I knew I wanted to hike. And I found the new bench trail that goes up to the top, Bench Lakes. They call it Bench Lake Trail. It's where the big fire was this summer, began there. So I found the new entry to the old trail where we'd been once upon a time and started hiking. And I was filled with just the thrill of being alone and making that decision all by myself, and made it to the top. It was a very rocky trail and you had to be careful, and I did slip and fall a little bit a couple of times, but I got to the top and found a big fat log to sit on and look out over the lake below. And finally it was time to go back down, and I was hit with another really good feeling. And I thought, I want to sing. I want to sing out loud, really loud. And the song that hit me was, what is it? Was it
On a clear day.
On a Clear Day? And I'm sure you've all heard it. The famous Barbra Streisand made it popular. And I'm one who, because I was a musician, I never remember words for music. I remember the music, but this time, all the words came forth. All the words. And I sang loudly all the way to the bottom. And I was astonished at myself, but I was thrilled because I felt so good. And I don't have a voice anymore to sing, or I'd sing you the words, but the words fit what I was feeling. You can see from far and near the world you've never seen before, on a clear day. So that kind of became my pilot song for the last 2 years. And since then, I have suddenly converted, and I think it was a numinous moment up there on the mountaintop. And I had to check that out very carefully. I was hoping I hope Bill would be here because he would know. But I think it was a numinous experience. It was so strong. It came on so hard and fast. And then that song, when I knew the words, and I never know the words to music. So I just, ever since, I've been, for me, very sociable. when I'm meeting new people, or I make a point of saying hello, or it's something that just comes out of me. I want to be with people. I want to get to know all kinds of different people. I feel good about myself. Finally, I guess I don't hold back anymore and feel like just a little waif that isn't as good as other people. Maybe I love myself in a way that I never could before. So that's my story, and I still read Jung because all the people around him. Some of my favorite writers, are Marion Woodman, Michael Conforti, Robert Johnson is a wonderful writer. There are several others. One of my very favorite women is Anne Ulanoff, who was Jungian at Union Theological School in New York, and she's written 2 wonderful books. And she was in Portland as the first speaker this year, and I couldn't go to see her, but I was in on a Zoom conference, so I've heard her speak, and she's extraordinary. But I'm still fascinated, and I'm still in all these books. I still find things that trigger excitement and understanding, and so I don't know. I think I'm done speaking, and maybe I'm done coughing, or maybe not. Now I should hold this.
As you spoke, I was reminded of a poem by Stanley Kunitz, The Longboat, and where he talks about, I'm not done with my changes yet. And he's writing this in his 90s, and it's a poem about experiencing death and getting ready, and the images. It's an image, but that last line of this older man, I am not done with my changes. Whoa.
Yeah.
And what I'd like to, this has been not at all what I expected, and it's been just terrific. And to me, this is not a feedback therapy thing. It could not in the sense of therapy needed, but a sense of one's unveiling life and the pattern that you see, and I see a pattern of taking that wounding, that early wounding, and then moving into early childhood as being no child has to go through this, and starting a program that would be more enlightened is like taking one's wound and transforming the self by being out in the world is miraculous. We don't often do that with our wounding. And then I see all along the way this person that felt like they got the confidence knocked out of them, but it's some way this intuitive inner self that is just, I need to be at that session. Okay, I can't go to that session. Okay, I have an appendectomy. No, I'll be at that session. That things lining up, that there's been a series of those that are just remarkable.
Yeah.
Culminating, not the end one, but being able to be on this mountaintop. And I'm getting clear here. This is getting clear.
Yeah.
And wow. And it's not clear in a rational sense. I mean, my ideas, but the clarity of person. I am dialing in who I am. And that is a terrific journey. And to share that here has been stupendous.
Thank you very much. You're reminding me of something that happened at the school one day that that fits right in with that. I was sitting with 3-year-olds, and the 3-year-old next to me had her little chubby hand on the table, and I had my hand up there too, and she looked at my hand and looked up at me and said, "Are you old?" And I said, "I really am." But then I sat there longer, and I realized that being with children and providing that environment was soothing me. I was personally gaining from all of that. And that just was kind of dawned on me one time. I wasn't looking for it, and I thought, oh, this is healing me. And maybe that's what was behind it in the first place. And that's what you're trying to say, I think.
This deep sense of direction that knew what you needed to do. And you went out, had courage, and did it with obstacles, little bringing it to Boise. It wasn't all pre-made. You got all these resources, inner resources, to make it happen in the world. It's wonderful.
Yeah. Before I read this, though, I have to say that although I forgave my mother and we made amends, and at her death, I sobbed and was just very sad for all the life we never did have together that we might have had. We played music together, but that wasn't loving. But I have to say that I never forgave my father. And I worked with a close friend doing an open chair activity. Some of you probably know about. I tried really hard to. I prepared for it, and she was really good at helping me. And I thought I had done it, but I hadn't. I have not, and I feel bad about that. He just didn't know any better. He's gone now too, of course. But I feel very sad that he and I couldn't have been friends, but I was just so crushed by losing my confidence in myself when I obeyed him. I shouldn't have, but I did.
But maybe Wally has forgotten your father so that you had to give up Carl.
Actually, Wally met Carl because 20 years after all that happened, we were in Vienna, and I called his brother, Carl's younger brother. He was 14 at the time that Carl and I met, and he recognized my voice immediately, or probably my German, which wasn't the best in the world. And he said,
I would also insert that we kept in touch at Christmas time with the younger brother.
"Oh, that's right. We sent Christmas cards." But Carl by then was remarried, but we still kept in touch with Peter. And he said, "Oh, you must come." We had dinner together, and then he said, "You must go see Carl. He's on the way to your Munich plane tomorrow morning, and you should." I think we had to send him a telegram. This was way, way, way back in the 70s. Telegrams.
Could be.
So I did that because Carl was so sure that I should go see him with his wife, his German wife. And we did, though. We actually were 2 hours late, and he was driving out of the parking lot of his apartment building as we were passing, and our eyes saw each other. We didn't miss each other. And so we went in, and they insisted we stay the night. And then he said, I will bring you to your airport exit in the morning at 6 and make sure that you get on that right road." So we did that. He drove his car. We followed him, got out of the car, and the last thing that we did was do a bump. It was the first time I'd ever done that. I hardly knew what to do. But that was the end of that. But it was. I appreciated that his little brother encouraged us to see him again. His English was wonderful. There was jazz going on in town. We had a wonderful tour of that little German town.
And Mary's dad misjudged Carl, because at the point that we met Carl, he was driving a large size Audi, the biggest one, and he was the general manager of a company that made leather luggage. And, Mary didn't quite say that when she was saying it. He was a leather worker, which is what the way her dad saw him. So he turned out to be very successful. So but she never got to tell her dad that. I think he was gone by then.
That was sure a big event in my life. That whole thing that I started out with tonight. But let's see what our dear friend James Hollis, who's pretty healthy, by the way. Okay, it's over here. If this is about the psyche, what does our psyche want? Our ancestors were connected to the psyche. It gave them the guiding dreams. When Jung talked about how the individual gets separated from the sources of insight, he said that when a person is thrown into darkness, they are also summoned to a journey in which a new light will emerge and a supportive energy. Unless you have found that in your own journey, it remains simply talk out there. But this is real. It's been reported through the centuries. It's the reality of the human psyche. It's a mystery. We know very little about it, but it is tangibly real. The word psyche, remember, in Greek is soul, and it comes from two etymological sources. The first is the verb psychen, to breathe. It's that life force that moves through us, that inspiration, respiration, the breath of the invisible life energy that courses through the body and animates it and souls it. And secondly, it was related to the image of the butterfly, something that transforms from the pupa over time into something beautiful. It's elusive. You can't quite get your hand on it, but it flits away and yet is stunning to behold. These were the primal metaphoric threads of the ancient imagination that sought to intimate the mystery of the psyche. And there is one more little story. It's a P.S. that this reminds me that while we were up at our cabin, at our cabin one August, I don't know how long ago, and having supper outdoors on the deck, and a little white butterfly came right toward me and landed on my lip. And then took off and twirled around and came back and sat on the table right in front of my plate. And we both sat there and watched it, and it just didn't move. And I had Wally look at it carefully so we could draw a picture of it, and I could send it to a friend of mine who knows butterflies and ask him what this was. I wanted the name of it. It had little green dots on the edge of its wings. And finally, we both got tired of sitting there, but you sat there and I carried the plate. No, I left the plate. And I went in the house to get the peaches and came back to the table, and it was still there. And finally, we just sat watching it, and finally it flew away. But it circled my head at one point too and landed, I said that, didn't I? Landed on my lip and then sat still. Well, my writer friend who knows butterflies so well couldn't name it. He'd never seen it before. He said, write to Washington.
The person she's talking about wrote the North American Guide to Butterflies.
Ron Pyle. Yeah, he should know. But he couldn't, and he's told me to go to the Library of Congress and let them figure it out, or one of those Washington places. I'm not sure that was it. Doesn't sound quite right. But they didn't know either. And so I have concluded that this was a psychoid event. A psychoid event. And the butterfly, as many of us know, is a very, what's the word? It appears all the time in old literature. It was considered a transformative state of something, like the butterfly. I mean, like like a moth. And I wondered if it was a moth that we had at the table. But I eventually went home and I made one out of rice paper, white rice paper, and hung it on a little string in my room where I do a lot of journaling every day. That I have my little butterfly there to remind me what an extraordinary event that was that day. So life is magic. It can be, and I think we continue to evolve. And I hope we all believe that and will continue our own paths. And never give up.